They've accepted that they're not going to be the next government. So now it's just a case of damage limitation. So I think that is part and parcel of their strategy, which is a renewed and relentless focus now on reform.
Yeah, well, my two daughters have to see and hear reform people who campaign for Nigel Farage calling me an effing packy. It hurts and it makes me angry. And I think he has some questions to answer. And I don't repeat those words lightly. I do so deliberately because this is too important not to call out clearly for what it is. Well, when you see reform candidates and campaigners seemingly using racist and misogynistic language and opinions, seemingly without challenge, I think it tells you something about the culture within the Reform Party. Andrew Tate isn't an important voice for men, he's a vile misogynist. And our politics and country is better than that. And as Prime Minister, but more importantly, as a father of two young girls, it's my duty to call out this corrosive and divisive behaviour. Thanks very much.
Now, up to the minute analysis from the Sunday Times political editor Caroline Wheeler. Caroline, welcome.
Good morning.
Nice to see you. Interesting front page of the Times this morning, the Kemi Badenoch interview, which throws up a number of themes. What do you make of the battle for votes on the right between the Conservatives and Reform at the moment? She's obviously criticised Nigel Farage very heavily in this interview. What do you make of that battle after Rishi Sunak responded to that racist term that was used about him by the Reform canvasser?
Yeah, it's really interesting because actually the Conservative Party haven't been talking about reform. It's been really difficult to get them to address the kind of elephant in the room, as it were, which is Nigel Farage, since he entered the race. And I think that was partly because they know that some of their supporters really like Nigel Farage and actually like some of the things that he stands for, and that they think that the party that they represent hasn't really been conservative enough and stood up for some of those more conservative values throughout the campaign. So it is interesting that they are now sort of turning their fire on Nigel Farage. And I think that that's been as a result of some of the changes that we've seen in the polls, actually, particularly since Nigel Farage actually made an intervention around Ukraine. That seems to have had an impact, with Reform rather going into reverse and dropping a couple of percentage points in the polls. And if you look at the Reform vote in particular, if you squeeze the Reform vote in certain seats, it will actually save some Conservative Party candidates, because the fear is that if they then split away and actually vote Reform rather than Conservative, it could let either the Liberal Democrats or Labour come up through the middle. So they're obviously in a kind of last-ditch bid to try and shore up as many seats as they can. I think they've accepted that they're not going to be the next government. So now it's just a case of damage limitation. So I think that is part and parcel of their strategy, which is a renewed and relentless focus now on reform.
So, as disgusting as those remarks were that were made about the Prime Minister, and notwithstanding his anger over them, do you think that the Conservatives sense an opportunity here to really attack Reform after this episode?
Yeah, absolutely. But it is kind of quite interesting, and it will be interesting to see whether this sort of new wave of stories, which is all around activists and some of the really appalling things that they've said, particularly around migrants, but also, that particular slur against the Prime Minister, will have an impact on their vote. Because, and it sounds terrible to say this, but, those views are perhaps ones that we might expect some of the supporters to have. And, there have been lots of cases in the past where some of the candidates have said some fairly abhorrent things. So it was interesting for me to see that it was actually the issue around Ukraine and his comments about Putin being a good leader that seems to have had the most impact on their sort of percentage share of votes. Whether this particular scandal makes a difference, I think will be fascinating to watch.
That is really interesting. And what you say about the inherent knowledge, if you like, that members of supporters of the Reform Party have about their politics is a key point, because Kemi Badenoch, in her interview with The Times, said that lots of Reform UK voters are good people, but they don't necessarily know what they're voting for. How do you think that's going to play out?
I think that worries me a little bit, in that I think, that's sort of what people were saying about Brexit, wasn't it? It was that kind of, these are all idiots who are voting for something which they don't really understand the full implications for, and it backfired spectacularly in that particular instance. And of course, we heard that with all the kind of Bregrettas afterwards, a suggestion that these were just people that didn't really know what they thought and had sort of inflicted, grave damage on the country because they, simply weren't intelligent enough to understand the arguments. I think that kind of language is always unhelpful in any kind of election campaign, because it actually tends to harden the resolve of those people that you're criticising.
Yeah.
So I think that particular line of attack is probably less fruitful than some of the others that they've been pursuing. But look, Kemi's got a particular message. We're on the brink of an election now. It's been a long time coming, but, by this time next week, we will have a new government in situ. I fully expect that we will be in the midst of a Conservative Party leadership contest. Kemi Badenoch is going to be one of the candidates in that race, and she is very much putting out a marker, I think, for where she stands on Farage effectively joining the Conservative Party. And it's been said that she is one of the candidates that has already made clear to her supporters that she doesn't perceive this as being, the best way forward. Whereas there are others around, for example, Priti Patel, who think that she, if she entered the race, might have a slightly more emollient attitude towards Farage joining.
Yeah. It's interesting that she said that she thinks Farage is only in politics for the limelight and the pursuit of celebrity, and doesn't care if Reform candidates are racist or misogynist. Do you think that's a persuasive pitch for those voters to return to the Tories?
I mean, possibly. I mean, as you will know from all of those incredible events that we've seen Nigel Farage turn up to, he is incredibly popular, and more popular perhaps than he was even several years ago during the Brexit debate, because of his appearance in I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, which was, a very calculated offer by him because he wanted to attract the support of younger people. So, yes, I mean, I think she is trying to sort of denigrate his role. I mean, what really will be left to be seen is if he does become an MP, I will be absolutely fascinated to see what kind of MP he is. Is he going to be in the chamber day in, day out, fighting for his constituents, or is he going to be on GB News continuing to sort of espouse his views and build a movement? I think that is what will really determine what kind of politician he's going to be more than anything else.
Yeah, interesting. Do keep your views coming in on this. Text 87222, start your message with the word Times. Tweet us at Times Radio, email studio@times.radio, and you can send WhatsApps to 0333 003 2353. Caroline, something a bit different. Tony Blair gave a surprise 5-minute pep talk to Labour HQ yesterday. I think he used the phrase no complacency. He said no complacency must be shown in the last week. Keir Starmer's brought the party back from the edge of extinction. There's no point being into politics unless you deliver change, the keyword in the Labour manifesto, of course. What did you make of that? Good optics to have Blair there?
It's really interesting that both parties are kind of relying on former prime ministers to do some of this rallying of the troops. My understanding is that Theresa May did the same actually in CCHQ a few days ago too. And particularly interesting that it was Tony Blair, because actually he hasn't always been the kind of figure that would necessarily be popular amongst activists. So it's interesting to see that he's had this kind of resurrection. But yes, I mean, I think the complacency message is one that we're hearing a lot at the moment. We're, as we said, only days away from the election now, and there's been much talk about the Labour Party winning a supermajority. And I think that that's making people quite nervous, because obviously if voters out there who perhaps not absolutely convinced by Sir Keir Starmer decide that they don't need to vote because the party's going to win anyway, that could have quite a significant impact on the size of its majority and its mandate to govern. So I think they are injecting a little bit of that message now into their activists to make clear that they're not over the line yet. But obviously the message of change is one that Sir Keir Starmer's been talking about endlessly. They've got their first steps for change for a Labour government, which I understand will be the kind of backbone of the King's speech when it comes in July the 17th. And, Tony Blair's being used very much to bolster that message.
Yeah. I was going to ask you, actually, who you thought the Conservatives could use to give a pep talk. I'd missed that line about Theresa May.
I don't know if anybody knew. I saw Theresa May this week, so I happen to know that she did it.
Right.
I'm not sure that it was necessarily been reported yet, but
was
she
it
did.
Successful? Did she run through a field of wheat, metaphorically speaking, for them?
Well, look, Theresa May's a very loyal campaigner. She's been, she has public service running through her bones. I think it's obviously been a bruising campaign for those that have been at it from the start, to see that the polls have been so intransigent. I mean, look, I think anybody that can sparkle a little bit of sort of sparkle dust on that particular campaign would be welcome at this stage. There's lots of people that are far, far too busy trying to defend their own seats to go and do that sort of thing. And Theresa, who is standing down at this election, obviously doesn't have her maidenhead seat to defend anymore, so she can be a bit more free to do some of that kind of more general lifting of spirits, as well as doing some of the campaigning in other seats.
Yeah, well, good luck to her on that. Looking ahead to the final week of campaigning, where do you see the political conversation heading, just briefly?
I think it is all going to be about complacency and getting out the vote. I think they really, really need to ensure that people are not staying at home because they don't know who to vote for, or decide that there's no point in voting because it's a done deal. I think you'll see people talking much, much more about the importance of actually going out and casting that ballot on July the 4th.
Okay. And then finally, I just want to come on to another subject. There are reports this morning that cabinet ministers here are privately urging the Democrats to get rid of Joe Biden as their candidate after the debate on Thursday night. Can you confirm that?
I haven't spoken to any cabinet ministers since that's been reported. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me, but I'm actually not quite sure how influential they would be in the kind of the scope of these discussions, given the obvious conversations that are going on within the Democrat Party already.
Yeah. But how alarmed do you think our UK politicians were, both in terms of Joe Biden's fitness for office now, but also in terms of the chances of another Donald Trump presidency? This must be something that they talk about. The WhatsApp groups must be buzzing with this sort of content. Yeah,
I mean, there's been lots of talk about Donald Trump being the president and, in a Keir Starmer administration, and how the relations might be between those. I think David Lammy, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, has been doing a lot of outreach work, and apparently he is in almost daily conversations with the Trump team, which you might find surprising given David's obvious connections with Barack Obama and the Democrats. But, look, he clearly can see a world where this may be a reality. He himself has said some fairly unadvisable things about Donald Trump, given the role that he may come to occupy. And so he'll be wanting to mend relations as quickly as possible. But look, whenever you speak to politicians on the record, they're very clear to say that the special relationship transcends, personal relationships, and that obviously diplomacy is key to both countries' interests, and that they will work with whoever is in office. But obviously, behind the scenes, people are gossiping like crazy.
Yeah, and just look through the other angle. Do you think the Americans are taking any interest in our election at all?
Hard to know, actually. I mean, we haven't seen any kind of obvious interventions at this point. I mean, look, I think when you have a special partnership and a relationship like the one that we do, there will always be some interest in what's going on the other side of the pond. I think that they will be, they'd probably have already priced in the fact that Keir Starmer is going to be likely to be the next Prime Minister. There is likely to be a meeting of the President and Sir Keir Starmer fairly quickly because of the NATO conference, which happens within days of him coming into Downing Street. So on that front, they will, of course, just for logistical reasons, know what's going on.
Great. Caroline, thanks so much. That's Caroline Wheeler. She's the political editor of the Sunday Times. You can catch her in the Sunday Times tomorrow, and with a digital subscription at thetimes.com. There's a fantastic offer, actually, on subscriptions to the Times at the moment. You can get your first 4 months for only £1. Yes, that's £1, which works out at less than a penny a day. I've got to stop doing overtime. To get the offer, just head to the Times website or app and look for the links to subscribe. Next, we're in the constituency of a big beast who has a chance of being the next Tory leader if she survives Thursday's election.